guys, good morning. It is April 11th, 2022. And today we are in chapter 24, verse 5 through chapter 24, verse 8. Starting in chapter 24, verse 5. The servant asked, "But what if I cannot find a young woman who will be willing to travel so far from home? Should I then take Isaac there to live among your relatives in the land you came from?" "No," Abraham responded. "Be careful never to take my son there, for the Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and named my native land, solemnly promised to give this land to my descendants. He will send his angels ahead of you, and he will see to it that you find a wife there for my son. If she is unwilling to come back with you, then you are free from this oath of mine. But under no circumstances are you to take my son there." God told Abraham Canaan was going to be for his descendants. God set it up that his descendants would come from Isaac. His promised descendants would come from Isaac. And now Isaac is old enough to get married. And God also set it up that Abraham would own some land in Canaan. The land that he bought to bury Sarah, the fields that he bought outside of the cave that he buried Sarah in. So he owns this land. God took him from his homeland and put him in Canaan. And when the servant says, "Oh, shouldn't I just bring Isaac back there?" it's not what God promised. And Abraham learned that going against what God promises and going against what God says ends up in a bad situation. But when Abraham trusts in the Lord, he says angels will go before you. So he knows that God's going to go before him, and he's going to find the wife for Isaac who will be willing to travel. And now on the human side of this, on the flip side of it, he's telling the servant, if you can't find Isaac a wife, well knowing that God's going to find it for him, then you can be released from the promise that you made. So he's reassuring the servant that he can kind of get out of the promise if he can't fulfill it, but he knows that God's going to fulfill it for him. Abraham learned that when God makes a promise, he makes a promise and he keeps it. He made a promise that the descendants would come from Isaac, but he told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. But Abraham knew. Do you remember when Abraham said, "We will come back"? So he knew God was going to do something. And in this moment, he knows God's going to do something. He doesn't know what. He doesn't know who. But he knows God's going to do something. So he's reassuring the servant that the Lord is going before him. God said, "Do not go back to that land." And so Abraham is saying, no, Isaac cannot go back there. Isaac cannot live in that land where God took me from. Here's my question. Is there ever been a moment where God has point blank told you, do not do this? Do not go there. Do not do this. I had this moment the other day where I knew I shouldn't do something. I knew I shouldn't go somewhere. And I struggled with it. But then God came up with a plan and showed me the plan. And in faith, I responded. In faith, I knew that if I said what I said, it would be okay. And the same thing here. Abraham knows that God is going to do something, so he's responding to that. He's responding to the fact that he knows God is going to show up, and he's going to help Isaac find a wife, and he's going to help this servant find a wife for Isaac. But Abraham knows also that he cannot go back there. He cannot move back into that land. Sometimes the things that we know we shouldn't do seem easier than the things we know we should do. It probably would have been easier if Isaac would just move back. That would have been easier, because then there wouldn't be this worry about about a wife not wanting to travel away from her home. But that's not what Isaac was supposed to do. That's not what the Lord told Abraham. So when we are faced with a challenge, when we are faced with something that seems like it would be easier if we just did it, sometimes that's not the right way to go. Sometimes the harder path, the narrower path, and Jesus speaks about this, that there's a narrow path that we must walk. Sometimes the narrow path seems harder, but in the end we are freer than what would happen if we went down the wider path, if we did the easier thing that we think is going to help us. Sometimes we're faced with a choice. We're faced with a problem, and we're faced with a choice. And it's hard sometimes. It's hard sometimes to be able to say, no, I can't do that. Because you don't know what's going to be the outcome. You don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes you aggravate people because of the fact that you choose to go against what it is that they want you to do, and you go against the things that you think are easier. But in the end, God frees you. Abraham is freer because of the fact that he trusts in the Lord, and he chooses the path that the Lord wants him to take. So, is there a moment in your life, maybe now, or maybe you're going to have to wait for that moment, but there will be a moment when this happens to you. Do you trust in the Lord enough to say, okay, I see my choices. I can kind of see where each path leads. And how are you going to respond to that? And can you see when God goes, okay, this is the way to respond? Are you going to trust in that? So I hope today you guys see Jesus in all you do. And I hope today you see God's promise all around you. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.